Welcome back to Mad Hatter's Civil War History. April 6, 1865, just days before the end of the Civil War. On a quiet stretch of land known as Hillsman's farm, something broke. Not just a defensive line, but the very structure of how war was being fought. Orders were still being given. Regiments still had names. Generals still commanded, but in the mud, smoke, and chaos of that field, none of it mattered anymore, because here distance disappeared. Union regiments from Major General Horatio G. Wright's 6th Corps surged forward, colliding with Ewell's exhausted defenders, Georgians, Mississippians, Virginia artillerymen, even sailors turned infantry. What followed wasn't maneuver warfare. It wasn't volley fire. It was hand-to-hand, bayonets, clubbed muskets, men fighting not for ground, but to stay alive. But to understand what really happened at Hillsman's farm, you have to go deeper than the maps, deeper than the movements. You have to step inside the minds of the men who were there, to experience the moment when discipline gave way to instinct, and war became something far more personal. So, if you want to see the Civil War not as lines on a map, but as a raw, human struggle fought in inches, make sure you've subscribed, drop a like, and stay with me, because this is the desperate valor, the hand-to-hand brutality of the Hillsman's farm charge. And trust me, this is one story you don't want to miss. We descend into the violent chaos at Hillsman's farm, a place where the structured geometry of battlefield maneuver collapses into something far more primitive. Here, on April 6, 1865, the Union assault that struck Richard S. Ewell's line was driven by Horatio G. Wright's 6th Corps, above all the divisions of Frank Wheaton and Truman Seymour, after Wright massed artillery in the front of Hillsman's house and opened the attack against the Confederate position just beyond Little Sailor's Creek. At the tactical level, this was not an anonymous blue surge crashing into a generic gray line. The Union forces at Hillsman's farm were made up of named brigades and regiments that carried the assault forward through the marsh. Wheaton's 1st Division advanced with the brigades of William H. Penrose, Joseph E. Hamblin, and Oliver Edwards, while Seymour's 3rd Division came on with the brigades of William S. Truex and J. Warren Kiefer. Within those formations, the fighting force can be traced down to the regiment level. Penrose's brigade included the 1st and 4th New Jersey Infantry in a consolidated battalion, along with the elements of the 2nd New Jersey Infantry, the 3rd New Jersey Infantry, and the 10th, 15th, and 40th New Jersey Infantries. Hamblin's brigade brought forward the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery, 65th New York, 121st New York, and the 95th Pennsylvania Infantry. Edwards's brigade contained the 37th Massachusetts, 49th, 82nd, and 119th Pennsylvania, and the 2nd Rhode Island, and the 5th Wisconsin Infantries. Seymour's men were just as clearly defined. Truex's brigade included the 14th New Jersey, the 106th New York, and the 151st New York Infantry, represented here by 5 companies, along with the 87th Pennsylvania Infantry and the 10th Vermont Infantry. Kiefer's brigade fielded the 6th Maryland Infantry, the 9th New York Heavy Artillery, the 110th, 122nd, and the 126th Ohio Infantries, plus the 67th and 138th Pennsylvania Infantry. These were the regiments that had to cross the broken ground, lose cohesion in the marsh, and then close with a Confederate line at lethal range. Opposing them in Hillsman's farm was not simply the Confederacy, but Ewell's Reserve Corps, with the immediate line formed by troops under G.W. Custis Lee, Joseph B. Kershaw, and John R. Tucker, all positioned on the high ground beyond Little Sailor's Creek. The Confederate command structure mattered here because this was not a neat, balanced engagement between two intact armies. It was a last-ditch defensive stand by a force under intense pressure, led at the top by Richard S. Ewell, with subordinate commanders trying to hold together a line composed of Richmond's defensive troops, veteran infantry, and sailors and Marines pressed into combat service. The best documented Confederate regimental structure at Hillsman's Farms comes from Joseph B. Kershaw's division, which included the brigades of Dudley M. Du Bois, William H. Fitzgerald, and James P. Sims. The Bois Brigade contained the 16th, 18th, and 24th Georgia Infantry and the 3rd Georgia Battalion of Sharpshooters, Cobb's Georgia Legion, and Phillips' Georgia Legion. Fitzgerald's brigade consisted of the 13th, 17th, and 18th, and the 21st Mississippi Infantry. Sims' brigade included the 10th, 50th, 51st, and 53rd Georgia Infantry. These were not abstractions on a map. They were the regiments that physically absorbed the Union blow on that shrinking front. Other Confederate units on Hillsman's front were even more unusual. G.W. Custis Lee's division is identified in the surviving organization tables at the brigade level as including Barton's Brigade, Crutchfield's Brigade, and Tucker's Naval Battalion, though the sources do not provide a single complete regiment-by-regiment enumeration for Barton's entire command at this stage of the campaign. What the sources do identify with great precision is Crutchfield's Brigade, which included the 10th, 18th, 19th, and 20th Virginia Battalions of Artillery, the Chaffin's Bluff Garrison Battalion, and the 18th Georgia Battalion, all fighting as infantry in the crisis of retreat. This is where the battle becomes especially useful for storytelling, because once these formations collided, organization rapidly gave way to survival. Long-range combat allowed soldiers some emotional distance. Close combat abolished it. The men in Wheaton and Seymour's division, who had crossed under brigade and regimental colors, were forced in the final clash into a fight measured in feet rather than yards. The same was true for the Georgians, Mississippians, Virginia artillerists, Richmond reserves, and naval personnel trapped in Ewell's line. At Hillsman's farm, command could start an attack, but it could not fully control what happened once smoke, mud, and proximity collapsed the battlefield into hand-to-hand violence. The psychological burden of that shift was immense. At a distance, a soldier could still imagine that he was participating in a maneuver, obeying an order, holding a line. In close combat, those abstractions began to fail. The mind narrowed to fragments: forward, strike, duck, breathe, and survive. The enemy ceased to be a line of battle and became a face at arm's length. That is what made the violence at Hillsman's farm so shattering. Men were no longer simply under fire. They were forced into direct, physical killing with bayonets, clubbed muskets, and brute force in the mud of the creek bottom and the fields beyond it. The leadership gave way to the primal logic of survival. That leadership story also gives this action its dramatic finality. What makes Hillsman's farm so powerful is that it compresses the war's final days into a single, intimate sphere of violence. Larger summaries of Sailor's Creek often emphasize the campaign's operational meaning, the cutting off of the Confederate retreat, the destruction of organized resistance, the road to Appomattox. But this ground tells the story at a human scale. Here, regiments that had marched under recognizable commanders and banners were swallowed into a fight where identity narrowed from brigade and division to the immediate struggle of one man against another. By focusing on this localized brutality, the story moves beyond battlefield summary and into lived experience. The erosion of discipline under pressure, the collapse of distance, and the terrible mental transition from tactical maneuver to primal survival. At Hillsman's farm, valor was not polished or ceremonial. It was desperate, confused, and inseparable from fear. The Union regiments that surged across the creek and the Confederate battalions and brigades that met them did so under named leaders and within structured organizations. But in the final collision, they fought in a world where structure itself was breaking apart. This is why this fight deserves attention. It does not merely illustrate the collapse of Lee's army at the operational level. It reveals what that collapse looked and felt like in one of its most brutal local expressions, through the actions of specific brigades, specific regiments, and specific commanders caught in the last violent convulsions of the Confederacy. Thanks for watching this episode of Mad Hatter's Civil War History. Like, follow, and click the bell for notifications to ensure you see all of the latest content. As always, let me know if there's any other important events of the American Civil War you would like me to address.